The roster is almost complete. So, on today's episode of the Locked On Global podcast, we are discussing three possible starting lineups for the men's basketball team next fall. That said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome in to another episode of the Locked On Global podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. As always, I want to personally thank you all for making this your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Global podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. The men's basketball roster is basically complete, has one more spot to fill, but the rotation is seemingly set in terms of numbers. We'll discuss three possible starting lineups for Louisville coming up in the fall. It's a very challenging discussion. We'll answer whether or not it truly matters and also identify who the locks to start are for the team. Obviously, if you're watching this, you can tell that I've added a backdrop. Now, granted, if you were to tell me, hey, it looks like you just threw some posters up on the wall, yeah, you're right. That's exactly what I did. But at least makes things a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. It does the job. And until I can get a permanent backdrop for the frame, it will do. So, sorry that it's taken so long, but if it makes a little bit of a difference, then it was worth it. But I won't get too much into the aesthetics of the production. Let's talk about one of the key discussions that Cardinal fans have been having since the Cardinals got a commitment from Noah Waterman over the weekend. That is, who will be in the starting lineup. There are three possible ones that I want to take a look at. Before you really dive into that, there are two questions that you have to answer. Number one, does it truly matter? People will ask that because Pat Kelsey's offense, Pat Kelsey's teams in general, a lot of substitutions. Players stay fresh because there's a very quick pace of play on the offensive end. It's one of the fastest teams on offense in the country every single year. So there will be more and more substitutions than what you are accustomed to seeing. However, two things. I would argue that, yes, it does matter who starts the game because it will show who sets the tone. Now, it could be equally as important as who finishes the game, and I think that two things are true at one time. Just because you want to know who closes the game doesn't necessarily mean that it is not significant to know who starts, because there are a handful of players, and at this point, it's just a hypothetical. The second reason, because it's fun. This is the first time in quite some time to where things have been fun surrounding the men's basketball program. There's so many different options that you can go with in the starting five. So forgive me for having a little fun. If you're one of those people that are going to inevitably comment, well, it doesn't matter because you're only going to play so many players and insert player here is only going to play 10 minutes and this guy's going to play 15. I don't care. Just allow me to have this stupid hypothetical. If you view it as stupid, I don't, because ultimately it's going to be who sets the tone for this team. Who are the locks to start? For me, there are three. I think Wisconsin point guard Chucky Hepburn is one of them. You don't start over 100 games in the Big Ten at Wisconsin over the past 3 years to come off the bench at Louisville. I understand spots are earned, but let's be 100% real here. We know who some of the starters are going to be. We're starting guarantees made. Probably. I mean, that's how you get some of these players. Terrence Edwards Jr. from James Madison, the Sun Belt Player of the Year, arguably going to be the best player on next year's team. I think he is a lock to start. And I think South Florida forward Kaysen Pryor is also a lock to start. Both three players will be included in all three of these possible starting lineup hypotheticals. Now, it is worth noting that these are just three options. With the versatility of this roster as a collective unit, you could pitch a couple different starting lineup options that I could look at and say, yeah, I can see that happening. But for me, these are the three that not only I feel like would make a lot of sense, but also the ones that I've seen a little bit more of on social media. So, and I know that social media just represents the fan base, but Louisville fans have done a great job of, I feel like, researching these transfers and understanding their strengths and how it relates to this team. So the first starting lineup that we'll talk about is, personally for me, I feel like the most likely. It's not the one that I would go with, but I feel like it's the most likely at this point. The starting five would be Chucky Hepburn at the 1, Terrence Edwards Jr. in the backcourt, and then you have a front court of Javon Hadley, Noah Waterman, and Kason Pryor. Obviously, Hepburn, Waterman, and Pryor, or Hepburn, Edwards, and Pryor make up 3/5 of the starting five. Noah Waterman bringing that three-point shooting, 6'11" frame, can or has shown the ability to create his own offense. And then serviceable on defense, you throw him into the front court for size, for mismatch purposes, along with Kason Pryor, and you automatically make things tough for the opposing defense. I threw Javon Hadley in there because, admittedly, I've been a person that is sleeping on him a little bit more than others because of a lineup that I'll discuss in the upcoming segment. But Hadley averaged 11.6 points per game and 6 rebounds per contest for a Colorado team that made the NCAA tournament. Now, he shot 41.7% from 3. It was only on basically just over an attempt per game, so we'll see if that was a fluke number or not. But plays really well for his size. 6'6", sort of a combo guard forward, more of a 4 than he is a 2, but can put the ball on the deck and get to the basket. Respectable shooter and good rebounder. Good playing around the rim for his size. So in this hypothetical starting lineup, the reason it makes sense is because offensively you have players that can create off the dribble and for themselves and for others. You have Hepburn, who will be the lead ball handler, the main initiator, the main facilitator. Terrence Edwards can be your number one scoring option mixed with Kason Pryor. And I think that that's what makes these hypotheticals so fun to talk about, is because the 3 players that you are locking into the starting lineup, so to speak, all 3 can create their own offense for themselves to where you can just bring complementary pieces onto the court. And if you have players that can create for themselves alongside of those 3, then it's just icing on the cake. And one of the reasons why I think Hadley could get the nod over players like Kenai Roots and Abubakar Traore and other players that fill that sort of spot is because he has Power 5 experience. He did this on a Power 5 team at Colorado, a tournament team. And he has that veteran presence as well, 6'6" from St. Paul, Minnesota. Spent his first couple seasons at Northeastern. He transferred to Colorado, and he has been a very, very solid piece on that Buffaloes team. Very balanced attack for Colorado. Started 36 of 36 games, 34 minutes a night, so he played a good amount. That's why I say that he's probably the most likely to start, because of the same situation with Chucky Hepburn, right? You're not going to start so many games at the Power 5 level just to come off the bench after that. That's sort of where I'm sitting there, and I'm wondering, just how you keep all of these guys happy. That is sort of a hypothetical that I'm like, okay, how are you going to keep all these guys happy? And, you have only so many minutes to go around, and that is where Pat Kelsey is inevitably going to make his money, is making those decisions like that. So I like this matchup offensively. Defensively, a ton of switchability. Hadley can guard the 2 through the 4. Edwards the same way. Waterman and Pryor would be guarding the larger players. I think Hadley can be utilized in switches to where he can guard bigger players. And then he also has the lateral quickness to guard opposing guards. So same thing with Edwards. Edwards is more of a guard-like player That's why I'm sticking him in the backcourt with Hepburn. But as you will come to find out about this episode, the name of the game is positionless basketball. And a couple things that really catalyze or that serve as the catalyze, that's not even a word, that serve as the catalyst for positionless basketball are defensive versatility and switchability, the ability to shoot the basketball, and also the willingness to pass the ball. And all five of these players they all possess these traits and skills. I mentioned that this is the most likely of the five. For me, I would go with a different look. And it's not because of something that some player doesn't bring, but more so the opposite, what a certain player does bring to the table. And I'll discuss that lineup here coming up shortly after we tell you about our friends over at LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for jobs, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place, because on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Cardinal fans, I said it once, I'll say it a couple different times. If you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV and you have to find yourself continually turning down the volume because of all the shouting, you need to make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. Couple different lineups that you could toss out there, even more than the ones that we're going to talk about or continue to talk about on today's show. The most likely of the starting fives, I would say, would be Hepburn, Edwards, Hadley, Waterman, and Pryor. My preferred starting five is a little bit different. You're going smaller. Hepburn is starting along with Edwards, Waterman, and Pryor, but I'm slotting Koren Johnson into the backcourt with Chucky Hepburn. I think that both of their skill sets in the backcourt will feed off of each other. Johnson has the ability to create his own offense. The reigning sixth man of the year in the Pac-12, averaged 11 points per game for the Huskies and was arguably their best player in the last month and change of the season. So, again, you can't go wrong with Hadley or Johnson. And if you want to make the argument of going with more size and more defensive switchability, I understand. But Koren Johnson is a very, very good defender as well. And a backcourt with Chucky Hepburn, one of the better defenders in the Big Ten over the past couple seasons, and Koren Johnson, who also in his 2 seasons in college averaged over a steal per game, does a great job of jumping the passing routes, does a great job of, utilizing quick hands. So Johnson only about 6'2", same with Hepburn. I don't really like throwing this comparison out there, but think Russ and Siva in the nature of it is a living nightmare to play against them and try to score consistently because they are very pesky, like Peyton and Russ were. So having that defensive stronghold up top while still having Terrence Edwards and Kason Pryor and Noah Waterman, I think you have more offensive creation with Koren Johnson on the court. Some people will argue that Johnson is better suited for the six-man role because he was very comfortable in that last season. That might be true, but I think he's going to take the next step forward. I said this on the Twitter space last night. I texted a friend of mine who has been covering college basketball at large for over a decade. He does NBA draft scouting as well. I asked him, who on this Louisville team are you looking for? Or are you looking forward to seeing play the most? And his answer was Koren Johnson, and basically said that he believes in the offensive creation ability. He thinks that he could end up being an all ACC caliber player, and not just like an honorable mention, but a possible, he didn't go as far as saying first teamer, but he said second team or third team. So actually, I don't even think ACC has a third team, if I'm not mistaken. But you get what I'm saying, is that Johnson is, in my opinion, being overlooked the most. And I'm not faulting anyone, because you're bringing in 13 new players. So inevitably, there are going to be some that don't get talked about as much as some believe them to be. But I like the backcourt pairing here, despite the lack of size. I think having two guards that can create off the dribble. They're two different types of guards. Hepburn can create his own shot, but he'll operate more in the mid-range. Johnson can stretch the floor and increase three-point shooting. And then you have Hadley and Traore coming off the bench, and it is just an absolute field day. The good thing is that you can then stagger the minutes between Hepburn and Johnson to where, you keep one of them on the court when the other goes off, and then you bring in Rain Smith, and it's just, you continually have very, very good guard play. And that's not to say that Terrence Edwards can't contribute to that, but I think Edwards is, truthfully, in my opinion, more of a 3 than a 2. But again, in the name of positionless basketball, it's not that big of a deal. It's just a matter of what fits on the court cohesively, what meshes together on both ends. I think this lineup might lack the size, might lack a little bit more of the defensive versatility and switchability, but what it does compensate with is better three-point shooting, more offensive creation, and I don't know. For me, it's just, this could be one of those situations to where Hadley might start the game, but Koren Johnson could be a guy that finishes it. And that's where we had the old discussion of, well, why does it matter if you discuss the possible starting lineups? Bro, have some fun, relax, and enjoy talking about Louisville basketball. Because here's another thing. At this point in time, yes, we'll talk about a new football portal commitment soon. We'll talk about the last basketball portal edition. But we're going into like the dog days of summer, to where there's not much to talk about. And I would rather have an episode talking about this than just discussing some random offer that the staff handed out over the past week and tried to find as much significance in that, when truthfully it's just an offer. So again, have some fun, relax. I want to hear what you all have to say. Drop your projected starting lineups in the comments below, whether you're on YouTube or if you're listening to this. Go to my Twitter, where the episode will be released, at @defense_, and leave your thoughts under that episode. So that's where, like I said, it's all about preference. It's all about what your personal opinion is. I think that you couldn't go wrong with either of the two possible starting lineups that we've discussed. For me, I would go with more guard play, because I think that Edwards can fill that Hadley role. And, you still have Waterman and Pryor. So you have a little bit more offensive creation, and you don't really drop off of a cliff defensively, actually, at all. I mean, Johnson is good in his own respective right defensively. So I'm perfectly fine having Koren Johnson replace Javon Hadley. But could you play them both at the same time in the starting lineup? I think you could, and that's going to lead into the final segment where we discuss the last possible starting lineup. And we will do that here in just a quick second after we tell you about our friends and the opportunities over at FanDuel. It's winner take all time. The NBA playoffs is down to the conference finals. NHL is coming to a close. FanDuel remains being the best place to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. One thing that I like to do is I like to make the parlay boost on MLB parlays. So tonight I had Kyle Tucker +2 bases to where he has to at least get 2 singles or get 2 bases on hits. I had Framber Valdez for over 6 strikeouts. I had the Seattle Mariners money line and more. With each leg you add after the third one, you get a percentage boost. FanDuel is great with percentage boost. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. The last starting lineup is all about, I'm not going to say disregarding size, but you are sacrificing size because you take Waterman off of the starting lineup and you basically keep Johnson and Hadley. So it's Hepburn and Johnson in the backcourt. You have Edwards and Hadley sort of as those interchangeable wings, and then you have Case and Pryor manning the middle, which I think he can be an opportunistic shot blocker. You have Javon Hadley, who's extremely athletic, who can be an opportunistic shot blocker. Terrence Edwards, a good defender that can guard the 2 through the 4. And then Hepburn and Johnson manning down the backcourt. I am intrigued by this possibility. Like, this is one that even if it isn't a starting lineup, I want to see these 5 on the court at the same time. Because ultimately, these could be the 5 that end the game for the Cardinals. You have Hepburn and Johnson, so you have that offensive creation. You have 2 wings that can switch on multiple players, whether it be guards or big men. They can create their own offense and take it to the rack. They play a lot stronger than both being about 6'6", 6'7". Hadley is very good inside. Post offense is a staple of his offensive repertoire. And then you have Case and Pryor, who is a unicorn type offensive player that can step out and hit the deep ball, create his own offense off the dribble, pass well, and be efficient around the rim. So 3 things: positionless basketball. What do you have to make this lineup work? Defensive switchability and versatility. You've got that. Check. I think Hepburn and Johnson can guard smaller guards their size, or even guards a little taller because of how well they play on ball. Edwards and Hadley, defensive versatility and switching, both can guard the 2 through the 4, maybe even the 5 in some situations. Pryor can guard the 3 through the 5. So the first objective is a green check mark. The next one, 3-point shooting. Hadley is really the only player on the court, or Hadley's probably the worst 3-point shooter in the 5, and if he's your worst 3-point shooter, you're probably feeling pretty good. Hepburn and Johnson, Pryor, Edwards, all 4 can knock down the deep ball at a respectable rate. Even Hadley has shown the ability to do that in catch and shoot situations, which, in my opinion, would be the role that he would be relied upon to play. So you have the 3-point shooting. All 5 of the players on the court have an over 10% assist rate. So what does that show you? Number one, it shows you that they are effective passers that are capable of facilitating the basketball in an offense that's going to continue to move the ball over and over. There's going to be a lot of movement without the ball, a lot of backdoor screens, delayed handoffs, intricate system that is reminiscent to the European style of offense. But one thing that it also shows, not only the capability, but the willingness. You can be a capable passer, but if you're not willing to pass, then it doesn't matter. All 5 of these players are unselfish with the basketball, and I think their skill sets really mesh well together. So this is the starting 5 possibility that is so intriguing, because you would think that the lack of size would, hurt them on the court, and maybe in some situations it would. Maybe it's all a matter of matchups. But Edwards and Hadley are both 6'7". Pryor 6'10". All 3 are very good on-ball defenders. 2 of them are opportunistic shot blockers that can play above the rim. And all 3 have a good amount of strength to their game. So, again, If this was the 1990s, you wouldn't be able to get away with it. But if you have in a lineup that lacks the size, if you have one quote-unquote big man and you have a couple of players that can fill the roles of rebounding, which Hadley and Edwards do well, defending bigger players, both of those guys do well, you can get away with that lack of size. So, and not to mention Noah Waterman plays on the perimeter a ton, so maybe even, I mean, I don't know, you could see a situation where, I think that's where Hadley and Waterman and Pryor, like all three mesh really well together. Another player that hasn't been talked about on this episode, but I wouldn't really count out the possibility of him starting, is if you want more guard play to start out and maybe you want to keep Corin Johnson in that six-man role, but he's closing out the games, maybe Rain Smith, the leading scorer from the College of Charlestown, who already knows Pat Kelsey's system, knows what Kelsey wants out of the players. Pretty solid secondary facilitator, good on-ball defender, could play that Ryan McMahon senior year role. That would make a lot of sense as well. If you want that three-point shooting, if you want a veteran guard that knows this system, that knows what's being relied upon, and you need a player to be able to instill that early on in games, especially early on in the season, then hey, maybe this does make sense. And you have Corin Johnson and Javon Hadley coming up, or not Javon Hadley, but Corin Johnson coming off the bench. Or you have Javon Hadley and Corin Johnson coming off the bench, or maybe it's Rain Smith and Javon Hadley, and then Waterman and Johnson come off the bench. This is where the problem becomes fun to have, is because you have a lot of players competing for so many different spots. And again, I'm acknowledging that there will be a lot of substitutions. So it's not as significant as it would be for a rotation that's not going to play as many players. Like, this team is going to play probably about 10 players in the rotation. That's a lot. But when you're playing a fast pace of play, it's necessary. So those are just my three options that I'm thinking about. If you have a different thought, or I want to hear what you all have to say. What is your predicted starting five for the Louisville Cardinals? Drop a comment in the section below. That is going to wrap up today's episode of the show. Coming up on tomorrow's episode, Louisville football got a surprise commitment from a Stephen F. Austin defensive lineman that will most certainly play a role this upcoming fall for the Cardinals. We'll discuss much more, but that is going to wrap up today's episode of the show. Everyone have a great day. Have a great start to your week. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns about the show, you can reach out to me directly or drop a comment in the section below. But everyone have a great day. We will see you right back here tomorrow.